Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar titled An Introduction to the Regulation of Chemical Cleaning Products in the USA. I'm Bill Bollock of Consult ISSA, and today I will be one of your speakers as well as your host and moderator. Today's webinar is reflective of the fragmented manner in which chemical cleaning products are regulated in the US. Now, depending on the product's intended use, label claims, directions, etc., a product may be subject to one or more of the laws and regulations that you see depicted on your screen here, which, among other things, govern the labeling and hazard communication related to various cleaning product categories. Now, there's one little exception to that general statement, and that's what we call extended producer responsibility regulations for packaging. Slightly different issue, but we'll address that later. In any event, the goal today is to familiarize you, our audience, with the framework of largely federal laws that govern the cleaning products that you produce, distribute, and ultimately use. Now, for each of the laws that you see displayed on this slide, we will provide you with an overview of the scope of products subject to that particular law, a brief overview of the labeling and other regulatory requirements, any relevant updates, and then lastly, where you can obtain additional information on each of these topics. Next slide. And of course, today's program is brought to you by the good folks at ISSA, the Worldwide Cleaning Industry Association, now representing over 10,500 members across the globe. Next slide, please. Now, before we begin the substance of today's session, I'd like to just take a moment to address a few housekeeping items. Please realize today's session is being recorded, and we will share a link with you to the archived webinar via email shortly after today's session. Now, in that same email, we will include a link to today's PowerPoint presentation. So you'll receive access to today's PowerPoint shortly after today's session. And then lastly, we will include question and answer sessions. Questions from the audience will be handled immediately after our first speaker's prepared remarks, and once again at the end of the presentation. But we encourage you all to post your questions anytime during today's webinar using the Q&A and chat function found at the bottom of your screen. And we'll address as many questions as time allows and follow up in writing with answers to any remaining questions. Next slide, please. And so now on to our first speaker, and that's Ms. Shay Ragland, ISSA's Manager of Regulatory Affairs. Now, Ms. Shay joined the ISSA team earlier this year, and it's been an amazing asset to both the ISSA Government Affairs team and ISSA members alike. Ms. Shay brings with her a wealth of industry experience, along with a deep knowledge of the laws and regulations that impact cleaning products. So please join me in welcoming Ms. Shay as our first speaker today. Good morning, Ms. Shay. How are you today?
Good morning, Bill, and good morning, guest. I'm very glad to be here. As Bill said, I am fairly new to ISSA. I've been here almost 5 months now, but I'm very happy to be presenting some regulatory information for you today. And we're going to start out looking at some of the FDA regulations, general regulations on 21 CFR, MOCRA, FTC Green Guides. And we're just going to cover a little bit of this information, and hopefully you'll get a good understanding of what these regulations are, how they're applicable to the cleaning industry, and where to go and find these resources if needed. So as I mentioned, my name is Ms. Shay Ragland, and we're going to start out looking at the FDA. So welcome everybody to this webinar. As I mentioned, navigating the regulatory landscape for the cleaning industry can be very difficult at times. So today we'll explore the evolving world regulations from the FDA, the impact of the Modernization of Cosmetic Regulation Act, MOCRA, and how FTC green guides influence the cleaning product industry. By understanding these regulations, you can ensure that your products are compliant, protect your consumers, and maintain a competitive edge. So first, as I mentioned, we're looking at the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration. What are they responsible for? They're responsible for foods, of course, drugs, medical devices, cosmetics, electronic products that could be related to medical devices, and tobacco products. The FDA plays a critical role in ensuring the safety and efficacy of various products, including cosmetics. While cleaning products themselves are generally do not fall under the FDA's direct oversight, certain ingredients or claims made about cleaning products can bring them under the FDA's purview. How does the FDA work with cleaning products? So how do they regulate cleaning products such as soaps, sanitizing wipes, shower gels, and other applicable products? There's many regulatory categories as we just went over, such as soaps, cosmetics, drugs, and combination products, which we will look at in this webinar. The FDA categorizes cleaning products into 4 main categories, which we just discussed. Each product category has its own set of regulations and requirements. It's important to note a product's intended use and marketing claims largely determine the regulatory category. First, we'll look at soaps. Soaps are defined by the FDA as products that clean and consist of alkali salts and fatty acids, primarily regulated by the Consumer Product Safety Commission, CPSC. The FDA regulates only if therapeutic or cosmetic claims are made. For example, body washes, anti-acne soaps. The regulatory landscape for soaps can be very complex due to varying ingredients and product claims. Traditional soaps are primarily regulated by the Consumer Product Safety Commission for safety concerns, generally exempt from FDA oversight unless they contain specific additives or make therapeutic claims. Note, on the other hand, if soap product is sold to the industrial and institutional markets, it will be governed by the OSHA Hazard Communication Standard. And that is for things that are sold for household markets, you would say CPSC. If sold to industrial institutional markets, OSHA, HCS. Soaps with added ingredients. These are products including those with antibacterial properties or skincare benefits fall under the FDA's jurisdiction as cosmetics. They are subject to certain regulations on labeling, safety, and good manufacturing practices. In the case of antimicrobial soaps, a subset of soaps with added ingredients are subject to specific FDA regulations due to concerns about antibiotic resistance. There are restrictions on claims and required testing. Understanding these distinctions is essential for compliance and navigating the regulatory environment for soap products. Now, if we're looking at cosmetics in general, these are products that are intended for cleansing, beautifying, promoting attractiveness, or altering appearance. Their cosmetics are regulated by the FDA, subject to the Federal Food and Drug and Cosmetic Act, focus on product safety and consumer protection. There are also labeling requirements for such ingredients and claims. They also fall under good manufacturing practices and GMP compliance. Some examples that might be applicable to the cleaning industry include body washes, shower gels, and some of the hand soaps that we use. They do not require FDA pre-market approval and must be safe for the intended use and properly labeled. Manufacturers are responsible for the safety and labeling and compliance of cosmetic products. So if we're looking at cosmetics in general, cosmetic soap products including body washes, shower gels, hand soaps are classified as cosmetics and regulated by the FDA. This means they're subject to Federal Food and Drug and Cosmetic Act, which prioritizes product safety and consumer protection. Companies producing these products must adhere to specific labeling requirements, accurately disclosing ingredients, avoiding misleading claims. Additionally, maintaining compliance with good manufacturing practices is crucial for ensuring product quality and safety. Here we can see, if we're moving on to drugs and looking at OTCs, we have our drug facts box, which is one of the main labeling concerns that we'll have to look at if you're looking at an OTC product. This is kind of a template for a hand sanitizer that was also a moisturizer. So it's kind of a template. You would put in your information, such as your active ingredient, your uses, your warnings, any type of instructions for use, how to use the product, when to stop, pregnancy warnings if applicable, directions for use, other informations, the inactive ingredients, and then of course the information for any type of concerns or adverse events would be there for questions. You would have the number and information of the manufacturer. So when we're talking about drugs in this sense, we're looking at products that are intended to affect the structure, function of the body, or to treat and prevent diseases. Examples, as we looked at, are antibacterial soaps, hand sanitizers, and face washes. They are regulated by the FDA as over-the-counter drugs, OTCs, which we all probably use something that's over-the-counter drug, must demonstrate safety and effectiveness, specifically labeling requirements is your drug facts box and panel, must show the active ingredients, and which is subject to review and approval. Restrictions on certain antibacterial ingredients such as triclosan have been put in place. You must also follow good manufacturing practices subject to very stringent safety and efficacy testing. So when we're looking at products classified as drugs, those are intended, as I said, to affect the structure function of the body or treat and prevent a disease. The FDA has established monographs or rules for several OTC categories. These monographs, which are published in the Federal Register, state requirements for categories of non-prescription drugs, such as ingredients that may be used and what the intended use is for. Among many non-prescription drug categories covered by OTC monographs are acne medications, treatments for dandruff, seborrheic dermatitis, psoriasis, and of course, sunscreens. Antibacterial hand soaps and sanitizers and some other hand soaps are considered over-the-counter drugs and are regulated by the FDA. Unlike traditional soaps, these products must undergo rigorous testing to prove that they are safe and effective in killing germs. The FDA has specific labeling requirements for these products, including the drug facts panel, which we have on our screen here. It's important to note that the FDA has placed restrictions on certain antibacterial ingredients that we mentioned, triclosan, due to concerns about potential health risk and lack of evidence in supporting their superior efficacy compared to regulatory soap and water. Manufacturers must be sure to comply with these regulations to ensure product safety and consumer protection. So one thing that you might use on a daily basis, or that you might even manufacture or distribute, are sanitizing wipes and hand sanitizers. This one gets a little tricky because the classification depends on the intended use and claims. If it's a cosmetic, only claim to cleanse the skin. A drug, if you claim to kill or prevent any kind of germs or disease. May require FDA approval if classified as a drug, depending on if it's listed on your monograph. Must follow appropriate labeling requirements based on classification. So as mentioned, sanitizing wipes, hand sanitizers can be an interesting case with FDA regulation. Their classification depends on the intended use and the claims made about them. If it's a wipe only that can be used to claim to cleanse the human skin, it's a cosmetic. However, if you're claiming to kill germs or prevent disease, it's regulated as a drug. Drug classification wipes may require FDA approval before marketing and must follow more stringent labeling requirements. It's crucial for manufacturers to carefully consider the product claims to ensure compliance with appropriate regulations. And we'll talk about claims and the difference between what is a drug, what is a cosmetic, and what some of these claims look like as we move forward. So if we're looking at combination products, here I have kind of an example of a sunscreen. We can say that this is a sunscreen with an added moisturizer. This is kind of just a general breakdown of, again, your drug facts box and labeling, showing your active ingredients, your uses, your warnings, directions for use, inactive ingredients, other information, And of course, you would have numbers to call for adverse events and the manufacturing information. So combination products, what are they? They're products that combine a cosmetic and a drug. Some examples, anti-dandruff shampoos, sunscreens with moisturizers. Of course, they must also meet regulations for both cosmetics and drugs. Labeling must clearly state both cosmetic and drug functions. So combination products are those that have both a cosmetic and drug properties. We've looked at some common examples like anti-dandruff shampoos, sunscreens with moisturizer. And these products, as mentioned, must both meet regulatory requirements for cosmetics and drugs. Their labeling also needs to clearly state both the cosmetic and drug functions. This dual nature often makes combination products subject to more complex regulatory oversight. If we're looking at something like a hand sanitizer with cosmetic claims that has a moisturizer as our kind of generalized template that I just showed you, we would look at that and say that this is a combination product that would need to meet both requirements. Again, if we're looking at, sunscreens with moisturizers, that's another example, as mentioned, where we need to meet both requirements. So again, they're both regulated by the FDA. Some can be regulated by the FDA Center for Devices and Radiological Health if it's kind of a product that's going to be used with medical devices, or CDER. Could be a combination product like that. This requires expertise in both drug and cosmetic device regulations and potential for dual labeling and advertising requirements. Some of the other things, it can increase the time and cost of the product development when you're working with dual type products. And like I said, this can be a hand sanitizer with moisturizing claims. It could be a sunscreen with moisturizing claims. You also have cosmetic products like makeup that have an SPF added to them. And then you also have like medical device wipes and things like that for cleaning medical devices, which we'll talk about later in the slides. So just be aware of those things and make sure that if you're developing combination products, that you have someone who has some expertise in both drug and cosmetic, or drug and device, drug, cosmetic, and device experience. These products, like I said, require dual labeling, they're complex, and they can significantly increase the time and cost of product development and to market entry. And understanding these challenges, again, is crucial for companies operating in this space. So next, the big question I think we all want to know is it a cosmetic? Is it a drug? Can it be both? And you see a lot of this, and you see that we used to have this thing called cosmeceuticals, where people would say, oh, it's a cosmeceutical. And we'll talk about that briefly as well. So we have questions like, how can a product be both a cosmetic and a drug? And whether a product is a cosmetic and a drug under law is determined by the product's intended use. Different laws and regulations apply to each type of product. Companies sometimes will violate the law by marketing a cosmetic with a drug claim, or by marketing a drug as if it were just a cosmetic without adhering to the requirements for drugs. So, can it be a cosmetic and a drug? Yes, it can be both. As we've discussed, it can be a combination product. So how can this be? Some products meet the definitions of both cosmetics and drugs. This may happen when a product has more than one intended use, as we discussed. We talked about the anti-dandruff shampoo. We talked about sunscreens with moisturizers. We also have hand sanitizers with moisturizer. We also have hand sanitizing wipes that also have some moisturizing benefits added to them. And again, we're looking at mainly the intended use and the claims that you're making for these. So that's how it can be both a cosmetic and a drug. So what about cosmeceuticals? As I mentioned, at one time, cosmeceutical, that term was thrown out like everywhere. But under the FD&C Act, they do not recognize such a category as a cosmeceutical. A product can be either a drug, a cosmetic, or a combination of both. But the term cosmeceutical has no meaning under the law whatsoever. So how is a product's intended use established? Intended use can be established in several ways. Some of the ways are claims that are stated on the product, in the labeling and the advertisement, and other promotional materials that you have for the product. Certain claims may cause the product to be more considered a drug, even if the product is marketed as if it was a cosmetic. Such claims can establish the product as a drug because of its intended use is to treat or prevent a disease or otherwise affect the structure and function of the human body. So those are some of the claims that you might have that determines whether your product is a drug, cosmetic, or a combination product. You also have to take in consideration things like consumer perception. This may be established through the product's reputation. This means asking the consumer is buying it and what they're using it for and what the consumers expect that product to do. So consumer perception also plays a big role in how these products should be regulated. Also looking at ingredients. Ingredients can cause a product to be considered a drug because they have well-known to the public and the industry therapeutic uses. A quick example would be fluoride in toothpaste. So how are the laws and regulations different for cosmetics and drugs? Well, this can get very lengthy, but I'm just going to give you a brief overview here. The main differences we have discussed is how cosmetics and drugs are approved. Cosmetics are now regulated under MOCRA, which we will discuss shortly, and OTC products are regulated under the FDA's Center for Drug Evaluation and Research, CDER. Information we have covered thus far is not a thorough review of these processes associated with laws, but kind of gives you a general overview and to alert you of some of the important differences and similarities between the laws and regulations for cosmetics and drugs, areas of approval, good manufacturing practices, registration, and labeling. And if you're looking at the PowerPoint slide here, we have some kind of examples, right, of what a cosmetic claim looks like, what an OTC claim looks like. And these are just some kind of general ones that I pulled out. And we can also apply this to hand sanitizers or soaps or, other body products, where you have a cosmetic claim could be for thicker, fuller looking hair. And then you have an OTC claim, something like a Rogaine, where you have restores hair growth. Another cosmetic claim would be for a visibly brighter and glowing complexion. Another OTC claim would be removes dark spots. So we have several categories here. You can read through them when you get the slide sets, but just some examples of what makes the difference. And I think that's the biggest part of deciding, is this a cosmetic? Do I need to be regulated under MOCRA? Is this, a drug? Do I need to look at the Center for Drug Evaluation and Research? Is this a combination product? And a lot of times you might fall into that kind of gray area where you're not really sure, but looking at the claims, looking at what you have in your product, such as the raw materials and ingredients you're using, can help you kind of establish that framework. So how are approval requirements different? Under the FD&C Act, cosmetic products and ingredients with the exemption of color additives do not require FDA approval before they go to market. Drugs, however, must generally either receive pre-market approval through the FDA or through a new drug application, or they must conform to the monograph, which we talked about a little bit, for a particular category, as established by the FDA's over-the-counter drug review. These monographs specifically have conditions whereby OTC drug ingredients are generally recognized as safe and effective and cannot be misbranded. So that's a little bit about drugs there. Some more examples of some drug claims that you can be aware of: acne treatment, dandruff control, any type of anti-inflammatories, like your over-the-counter Tylenols and things like that, eczema and psoriasis or rosacea treatment, antiseptic, antibacterial, antimicrobial, which is kind of the categories that I think most of us would fall into, hair growth, regrowth, antiperspirants, scar care, chapped, cracked lips treatment, and of course the SPFs and sunscreens. Okay, so moving on to another aspect is the FDA regulation of liquid sterilants and high-level disinfectants. I touched on this kind of briefly when I talked about medical devices and how we clean medical devices. And this is one of the things that comes up a lot is how do we deal with liquid sterilants and high-level disinfectants? And so the FDA regulates liquid sterilants and high-level disinfectants intended for processing critical and semi-critical medical devices. These products are classified as a Class 2 medical device and require 510(k) pre-market notification for clearance. Key regulatory requirements, pre-market notification. Of course, your 510(k), manufacturers must submit a 510(k) application demonstrating substantial equivalence to a legally marketed predicate device. Labeling, products must have accurate and informative labeling, instructions for use, warnings, and precautions. You must also demonstrate efficacy. Manufacturers must provide data demonstrating the product's ability to effectively kill or inactivate microorganisms on medical devices. Safety, products must be safe for use on medical devices and for patients. Quality systems, manufacturers must adhere to good manufacturing practices, GMP, to ensure product quality and consistency. Must also be prepared to have adverse event reporting. Manufacturers must report adverse events related to the product to the FDA. So for specific considerations for sterilization versus disinfection, the FDA differentiates between the sterilization, killing of microorganisms, and high-level disinfection, killing of most microorganisms. There also is device compatibility, where products must be compatible with the specific medical device they are intended to process. And also we must keep in mind about user training. So having clear instructions and training are essential for proper use of these products. Of course, by adhering to these regulations, manufacturers can ensure safety and effectiveness of their liquid sterilants and high-level disinfectants for reprocessing of medical devices. So this is kind of a niche category here where we talk about liquid sterilants and disinfections for medical devices. And I do have some kind of references for you to look at the end where you can get more information on this. But I just wanted to bring this up because every now and then we do have questions about this particular topic. And even though we're not going to go into a deep dive on this, I wanted to make sure that we did mention this in this webinar so you were aware of this if this is an industry that you work in or that you produce products for. So wrapping everything up, everything comes back to labeling and claims, right? So when we're looking at regulations in general, labeling, claims, substantiation, this is something that no matter what industry you're working in, cosmetics, personal care, cleaning industry, medical devices, these are the big ones that always get people, right? Is making sure that your labeling is compliant, making sure that you can substantiate claims, making sure that you have systems in place for adverse events, and that you're keeping proper GMP practices in your production and facility. So with labeling requirements, of course, they must be truthful and not misleading. Cosmetics, you must have a list of ingredients, product identity, your net contents, manufacturer, distributor information. With drugs, you have additional requirements, including active ingredients, uses, warnings, directions, your drug facts box. And here on the slide, I have like kind of a little round wheel of what is required when you're looking at your cosmetic labeling, what is required when you're creating your drug facts box if you're looking at kind of an OTC drug. And of course, labeling is the critical aspect of regulation for all of these products. And labels, of course, must be truthful, not misleading. For cosmetics, labels must include, of course, your ingredient list, your product identity, net contents, manufacturer, distributor information. And as we mentioned, the drug products must have additional requirements, including your drug fact box, which are active ingredients, uses, warnings, directions for use, proper labeling. This also ensures customers have the information they need to use to make sure that they're feeling safe and confident and that their products are working effectively. So I think the labeling is a big thing, no matter what industry you're in, making sure that you have the right information on your labeling, making sure that you're following the right regulations as it pertains to your particular type of product, cosmetics, drugs, combination products, medical device cleaning products, labeling and claims are very important. So what are the same things that happen with enforcement and compliance? The FDA can actually conduct facility inspections, can issue warning letters for violations, has the authority to remove non-compliant products from the market, and encourages voluntary compliance through guidance documents. And I kind of have that asterisk there by encourages voluntary compliance through guidance documents because with the implementation of MOCRA, which we will discuss shortly, there has been some things set in place where these are now requirements. So the FDA enforces these regulations through various means. They conduct facility inspections to ensure compliance with manufacturing practices. For violations, the FDA can issue warning letters for manufacturers. You can also have the authority to remove non-compliant products from the market. However, the FDA also encourages voluntary compliance, providing guidance documents to help manufacturers understand and follow regulations. And MOCRA, as I mentioned, has changed some of the voluntary compliance with the cosmetics to some extent. And like I said, we'll move on to that shortly. And then you'll see what I'm talking about by it's not all the way voluntary anymore. So, okay, moving on to MOCRA. Everybody has questions about MOCRA. MOCRA is the Modernization of Cosmetics Regulation Act. MOCRA was signed into law in December of 2022. Full enforcement right now as of July 1st, 2024. And of course, it's kind of the most significant reform in cosmetic regulations in the US in over 80 years. So this is a big leap for a lot of people. And I think a lot of people in the industry were not really prepared for MOCRA. I'm not sure if we're still prepared for MOCRA, but it is here and we now must comply. So as mentioned, the Modernization of Cosmetic Regulation Act of 2022, enacted in December of 2022, is the most expansive FDA authority to regulate cosmetics since the Federal Drug and Cosmetic Act was passed in 1938. This new law will help ensure the safety of cosmetic products that many consumers use daily. While primarily focused on cosmetics, it's important for implications in many cleaning products as well, that might fall into that cosmetic category. So yeah, here we go. The big MOCRA provisions. Okay, so we have here facility registration, which requires cosmetic manufacturers to register their facilities with the FDA. Product listings. Manufacturers must submit product listings for each cosmetic they produce. Adverse event reporting. Manufacturers are now required to report serious adverse events associated with their cosmetic product. And there's also fun new labeling requirements. So again, MOCRA introduces these key provisions that we must now comply with. Facility registration, serious adverse event reporting as well. This is a new requirement to report serious adverse events to the FDA within 15 business days. Good manufacturing practice, which hopefully we were all doing before MOCRA, that we had a GMP plan in place and GMP training. The FDA will establish GMP regulations for specific to cosmetics. Safety substantiation. Companies must ensure they have data to substantiate the safety of their products. Recalls and record keeping. The FDA now has a mandatory recall authority, and companies must maintain these records. MOCRA also requires that each fragrance allergen in a product should be displayed on the label. Although precise requirements for this will be set by the US FDA. This will occur within 18 months of MOCRA's enactment, which is in June 29th, 2024, just passed here, and within 180 days after the conclusion of the public comment period. These provisions aim to enhance product safety and increase transparency in the industry. So this is a big shift, I think, in the industry as it applies to cosmetics, personal care, which some of your products might fall under. And I know this is something that, people have been preparing for since it was brought up, but they pushed it back. It was first supposed to be implemented in December, the end of December of the last year, and then they pushed it out to July because people had needed some time to kind of get through the submission process, facility registration. How do we update our labeling? Is there, going to be some time where we have adjustment periods to update labeling? So this has been a big movement from the FDA. And like I said, the biggest one in like 80 years. So I know a lot of people might have questions about MOCRA. So who is subject to MOCRA? You have the responsible person, right? So that's your manufacturer, your packer, distributor of cosmetic products whose name appears on the cosmetic product label. There are some small business exemptions. So average gross sales in the US for the past 3 years is less than $1 million US, adjust for inflation, and those who do not engage in manufacturing or process of certain items. So what is your responsible person? So many of you may do business in the EU, you may market globally and sell your products. So you're used to the term responsible person from an EU perspective. And it's kind of similar for MOCRA, but a little different. So the responsible person is the manufacturer, packer, distributor of the cosmetic product whose name appears on the label of such cosmetic product in accordance with Section 609A of the FD&C Act or Section 4A of the Fair Packaging and Labeling Act. So it's a little bit different here. And if you are an importer into the US, you would also need a responsible person. So you would need a responsible person to be here in the United States to represent your company as well. So I think that's kind of where it's similar to the EU, where if you were, importing product to the EU, you would usually have a responsible person in the EU that would kind of be your go-between to market your products in that region. So it's kind of the same in that respect, but you're also the responsible person as the manufacturer, packer, distributor of the cosmetic product. Other exemptions. So there are a lot of different exemptions here. Besides you have the small business exemptions, but you also have certain entities that are exempt from registration and product listing, such as beauty shops, salons, beauty shops, places like that, that are selling cosmetic products, kind of a third-party seller or distributor of products. Cosmetic retailers, including individual sales representatives, direct sellers, and retail distribution facilities, pharmacies, places like that that are not sold directly to consumers at that location. They can have some type of exemptions as well. Hospitals, physician offices, healthcare clinics that might sell, cosmetic grade products. If you think of like going to your dermatologist, or if it's a hospital that has kind of a dermatology center or something like that. There's also the exemption for public health agencies and other nonprofit entities that might provide cosmetic products directly to the consumer. So there are some exemptions here, and there's a lot of little wiggle room when it comes to like beauty shops, cosmetic product retailers, hospitals, and like I said, you might think about your dermatologist office or someplace that offers, skincare treatments or things like that. They would be exempt from registration and product listing requirements. So how does MOCRA actually impact the cleaning industry and cleaning products? So it will affect products classified as cosmetics, such as hand soaps, body washes. There's, of course, increased regulatory oversight and compliance requirements that we talked about. There could be the potential for product reformulations, enhanced safety measures and documentation, and of course, there's greater transparency for consumers. So, of course, MOCRA means increased regulatory oversight for companies, and they will need to invest in compliance efforts and this could lead to increased cost, potential product reformulations to meet new safety standards. On the positive side, these changes are expected to enhance safety measures and documentation practices within the industry, and this will likely result in greater transparency for consumers and potentially increasing trust in our products. It's important to note that while many cleaning products fall under cosmetic regulations, not all do. Products primarily intended for cleaning household surfaces, for instance, may not be affected by MOCRA. So what are the next steps when we look at MOCRA for the cleaning industry and companies associated? The first thing you would probably want to do is assess your product portfolio and see if any of the products you sell are applicable to these regulations. Implement systems for facility registration and product listings if you haven't already done so. Develop or enhance adverse event reporting processes. Prepare for GMP compliance, review and update any safety substantiation documentation, and stay informed, of course, about FDA guidance and deadlines. So these are some of the crucial things that companies, I think, should start doing. I know a lot of people may not have been doing a lot of this prior to the implementation of MOCRA, and a lot of people are still trying to get supporting documentation, prepare for a GMP certification, doing facility registration and product listings. So all of this might be something that you're still tackling, or it might be something that you were already doing, and the MOCRA implementation has just kind of made you kind of tighten up a little bit and look at your files and look at your documentation and look at your labeling and kind of button those things up a little bit better. But again, it's crucial to start preparing now if you have not already, because many MOCRA's provisions will be phased in over the next few years. It's also important to be proactive about your compliance, and that will actually ensure a smooth transition and maintain your customers' trust in your industry's products. So coming soon, we will have a FDA workshop, I think in December. So just stay alert for that on the ISSA's website. And hopefully we can do a deeper dive, because I know this is a really quick, overview of all of these regulations under the FDA. And it's a lot. But I wanted to give you kind of an overview of, what is a cosmetic, what is a drug, combination products, MOCRA. But again, hopefully with the FDA workshop, we'll do a deeper dive into some of these topics, and you can have a better understanding of how to fully implement them into your businesses if you haven't already done so. So next, we're going to talk about the Federal Trade Commission and green guides. It's a fun topic. So what are FTC green guides? The Federal Trade Commission enforces the FTC Act, which prohibits unfair or deceptive advertising and marketing practices. The FTC Green Guides provides guidance to businesses on how to make environmental marketing claims that are truthful and not misleading. Claims such as green, eco-friendly, sustainable, biodegradable are all subject to FTC Green Guides. So the FTC plays a vital role in ensuring fair and truthful marketing practices. The FTC Green Guides offer specific guidance to businesses on how to make environmental claims regarding their products. It's important to understand FTC Green Guides to avoid misleading consumers with cleaning products marketing efforts. So FTC Green Guides impact on the cleaning industry. How does it impact this industry? They can impact the cleaning industry by encouraging clear and substantiated environmental claims, discouraging misleading or unsubstantiated claims, such as vague claims or of being green claims. Highlight the importance of considering the product's entire life cycle when making environmental claims. So it's very impactful, I think, as far as your marketing practices go and your claims. So the FTC is encouraging clear and well-supported environmental claims to discourage misleading or unsubstantiated claims, For instance, by simply stating a product is green without an explanation wouldn't comply with the green guides. FTC also emphasizes considering a product's entire life cycle when making environmental claims. This means considering not just only am I formulating to a green standard, but also the manufacturing process, your packaging, your materials, disposal impact on the environment. So how are you, disposing of these materials? What does the waste look like for these materials? So it's all encompassing when you're looking at the FTC Green Guides. So that was a really short overview, and it's only because of the FTC Green Guides, that is, because they are still being updated at this time. When I last looked, they're still in the finalization process of updating the FTC Green Guides. This has been going on now for months, but as soon as they're updated, we'll probably do a bigger webinar, a bigger series, and do a deeper dive into the FTC Green Guides. But one thing you should know is that it is important when you're making green claims that you can substantiate them and support them and back them up. And also, as I mentioned, looking at the full product life cycle, usually people are looking at better ways to be sustainable, using sustainable practices, looking at scores on like eco-friendly types of products and formulation and packaging. So it is the full life cycle, and the FTC Green Guides provide you with that information on how to better market your environmental friendly or green products. It actually gives you kind of a layout, and I have a link for that, of things that you should look for, words that you can say, claims that you can make, and how to substantiate them. So please keep that in mind. I know that there was two slides about FTC Green Guides. But like I said, they're in the process of kind of reworking these. And as soon as we have information that they finalize this, we will definitely put this out. The last one was finalized in October 2023. So we're still hoping that we can get some updated green guides soon here. So moving on, meeting the challenges and opportunities. I have this little thing here that says challenges are what make life interesting, and overcoming them is what makes life meaningful. I try to keep that in mind, being a regulatory person, because I know a lot of times we're like, oh my goodness, how do I meet these challenges? How do I stay up to date in all these regulations that are coming about? So it can be difficult at times, but I think if you're in this webinar and you're here today trying to get an overview of all these different regulations and processes, that you're definitely up to meeting the challenges. So how do we do that? How do we meet challenges and opportunities? So regulations and guidelines discussed in this portion of the presentation can pose challenges, but also present opportunities for the cleaning industry. Companies can address challenges by proactively seeking regulatory compliance and guidance, investing in quality control and safety measures, developing clear and truthful marketing materials. By proactively seeking these guidances, companies can ensure their products meet all safety and labeling requirements. Investing in quality control and safety measures demonstrates a commitment to consumer safety and product efficacy. And finally, developing clear and truthful marketing materials that comply with the FTC Green Guides builds trust with consumers who are increasingly environmental conscious. So just kind of keep those things in mind as you move forward, as you're looking at the regulations. If you go back and look at some of these slides and look at the links that we provide to you, how can you meet these challenges? What are some opportunities and insights you can gain from being more compliant, by making more truthful and substantiated claims, by making sure that you have GMP processes in place or certifications for your facilities? Going back to MOCRA, making sure that you're reviewing your documentation, reviewing your products, making sure that you know if you need to register your facility, you know that you need to list your products that might be fall under MOCRA. So just thinking about all of these things, and I know it's a lot. Like I said, this is a general overview. We'll do some deeper dives and more webinars because I know this is a lot, but definitely take some time to try to think through some of these things as you go through the slides on your own, or if you follow some of the links that we provided in the webinar. So staying informed and engaged, again, making sure that you're informed about regulatory updates is crucial to our industry. Resources for staying informed. Of course, you'll have the FDA website for cosmetic regulations, CFR Code of Federal Regulations, Title 21. I provided a link to the FTC website for green guides. And of course, you have great industry associations such as us here at ISSA to try to help you stay informed and engaged. Because we know the regulatory landscape can be very challenging. So staying informed is crucial to the cleaning industry. There are definitely key resources here to help you stay informed, such as the FDA website, FTC Green Guide site, trade associations. So keeping these resources open are a valuable resource for any regulatory updates and compliance best practices. So to summarize, again, I'd like to thank you for attending this portion of the webinar and navigating FDA regulations, MOCRA, FTC Green Guides as it relates to the cleaning industry. I know there was some stuff in there that wasn't directly related to the cleaning industry, such as talking about, some of the cosmetic stuff, but I think a lot of it can be transferable to some of the work that we do. So far we've explored the FDA regulations. We've looked at how they impact cleaning products. We've looked at MOCRA and the importance of complying with FTC Green Guides. By understanding these regulations and guidelines, you can always ensure that your cleaning products are safe, compliant, and marketed truthfully to your consumers. So remember, staying informed and engaged with the industry resources is key to navigating and evolving in the regulatory landscape. We encourage you to consult resources mentioned in the presentation for further information. And again, I'd like to thank you for your time, and please do not hesitate to reach out if you have any questions. I know we have a few questions on the Q&A, and we will get to those in a minute. And again, like I said, I do have a few resources here for you, so please feel free to check those out when you have time. And now I think we can take a little bit of time for Q&A. I see one question here from Abigail, who's asking, does it impact combination products, drugs and cosmetic products like hand sanitizer with moisturizer? Abigail, I'm not sure what this was in reference to, but as far as, yes.
I think what she's asking is how might MOCRA impact?
That's what I was thinking.
A combination product that meets the definition of an over-counter drug as well as a cosmetic.
Yeah, so with that, you would be looking at both regulations, right? So we would have to look at drug regulations, and then we would have to look at MOCRA. So you would be trying to comply with both when you're looking at something that's a drug and cosmetic, like a hand sanitizer with a moisturizer. So the labeling would have your drug facts box, which we can see on the slides here. So you would have your drug facts box, but also you would also have any type of cosmetic labeling information you need. So you would have your period after opening, you would have your net contents, you would have, of course, your manufacturing information, you would have your ingredient list, which would be your main active in your drug facts box, and then you would have your regular ingredient list as your inactives. So it would be kind of a combination. So you're making sure that you have your claims and that you've substantiated those because you want to follow what MOCRA is saying. You want to make sure that you have all your supporting documentation for any type of adverse event reporting, but you also want to make sure you're following that labeling compliance with a OTC drug with your drug facts box and that labeling as well. So you're kind of meshing the two, making sure that you have things to support MOCRA substantiation and MOCRA compliance, but making sure that your labeling is also following that OTC monograph labeling with the drug facts box. I hope that kind of helped.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. One more question for you, Ms. Shea. And this relates to the FTC Green Guides, actually the anticipated revisions. Can you share with us any overarching comments as to kind of what's going to be the big change in those guides?
I think the biggest change will be just more details on um, what you can and cannot say as far as the claims you're making. Like they were talking about just kind of generalized green products, right? There will be more information as far as what you need to substantiate that, how to make those claims, and what you can actually say on your labeling. So I think there will be a more detailed approach to how you substantiate your green claims and also the labeling as it pertains to making any kind of green or environmental claims. And also a lot more, I think, will focus on sustainability of products and like the whole product life cycle, as I mentioned, because I think that's one that's been missing in the industry in general when you look at clean products or green products, or even if you're looking at sustainability, is are you making sure that that product is green through the full product life cycle? And I think, as I mentioned, consumers are really paying closer attention to this as well. You'll see a lot of consumers looking at packaging or looking at the material processes in general through the whole product life cycle. Where are you sourcing your materials from? This is a big one as well. And people are paying a lot of attention to that, especially the sourcing part and the packaging part.
Thank you. I might also take this opportunity to remind people you can pose your questions in the Q&A and or chat boxes located at the bottom of your screen. I also want to take this opportunity to thank Michelle for a wonderful presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. And I'm going to ask you to please move the slide one forward. All right, on to our next topic. OSHA's hazard communication standard, although there's a typo in there, my apologies. Next slide, please. The OSHA hazard communication standard's primary purpose is to protect workers from hazards of chemicals to which they may be exposed to in the workplace, including cleaning products. Now, because OSHA and the HAZCOM standard are limited to covering worker safety, the scope of products covered by this regulation are typically in the I&I or the institutional and industrial space. The HAZCOM standard covers the majority of cleaning product categories, including such products as general purpose cleaners, general purpose degreasers, glass cleaners, bathroom cleaners, carpet cleaners, metal polishes, floor care products. All of these product categories are subject to the OSHA Hazard Communication Standard and its labeling and SDS provision. Next slide, please. Just as important are the product categories that are exempt from the OSHA HAZCOM labeling requirements. And those include hand sanitizers, regulated as OTC drugs, and cosmetics like body washes, provided that they are regulated and labeled consistent with FDA regulations. So it's not like these product categories are exempt from any labeling. They're just exempt from OSHA labeling, simply recognizing that the labeling of those products are actually subject to another regulatory authority. Also exempt from OSHA labeling are disinfectants, sanitizers that are regulated as pesticides under FIFRA, provided that they're subject to and labeled consistent with EPA's pesticide regulation. Now, it's important to note that these product categories, while exempt from OSHA labeling, are still subject to the OSHA SDS safety data sheet requirements and certain other provisions of the OSHA HAZCOM standard when used in the workplace. Next slide, please. Now, this slide captures major obligations created by the OSHA HAZCOM standard. And while today we're focusing on labeling and safety data sheets only, please note that the standard does create obligations that are applicable to employers whose employees may be exposed to hazardous chemicals, which include cleaning products. The obligations I'm speaking of are the written hazard communication program and employee training. Next slide, please. Please note that the OSHA Hazard Communication Standard is the regulation that gives us the SDS and all its glorious 16 sections, which are listed here on the slide. Now, while I will not address in detail these 16 sections, it's important to know that the SDS Safety Data Sheet provides very detailed information on the hazards a product or a substance presents, and also critical information on how to work safely with that product. And one last comment, please note that for sections 12 through 15 on the SDS, OSHA has absolutely no authority whatsoever to enforce those sections. Those sections are present largely because of OSHA's alignment with the GHS that I'll touch on in just a minute or two. All right, next slide, please. In addition to the safety data sheets, OSHA also establishes labeling requirements under the HAZCOM standard that are displayed on the slide. Product name, signal word, danger, warning, hazard statements, pictograms. You have a corrosive pictogram displayed on the slide. Precautionary statements, name of the responsible party or manufacturer, and so on. Next slide, please. You know, it's important to note that not too very long ago, in 2012, the OSHA Hazard Communication Standard was aligned with what is termed the globally harmonized system of classification and labeling of chemicals, known as the GHS. The most notable impact, the alignment of the OSHA Hazard Communication Standard, aligning it with GHS, the biggest impact is on labeling and the SDS provisions. Those are more or less consistent with the GHS. Now, please realize that the GHS itself is not the law. It is a model rule that of which certain elements have been incorporated by OSHA into the Hazard Communication Standard, which is the law. And more importantly, OSHA has committed to update and revise as necessary the Hazard Communication Standard to continue to be consistent and in alignment with the GHS. And OSHA most recently did just that when it published its latest revisions to the HAZCOM standard on May 20th of this year. And those changes are intended to align the HAZCOM standard with the 7th edition of GHS. Next slide, please. I'd like to take just a few minutes to highlight some of the more relevant revisions to the HAZCOM standard, starting with the dates, important dates. Now, while the rule has an effective date of July 19, 2024, the more relevant dates are the following dates by which compliance is required related to labeling and SDS. Now, effective January 19th, 2026, as it relates to substances or raw materials, manufacturers, importers, or distributors of those substances must be in compliance with the SDS and labels, as revised by the most recent rule. Come July 19th, 2027, as it relates to the cleaning products that we're speaking of, OSHA calls them mixtures, but realize that they're referring to cleaning products in our case. And so by that date, manufacturers, importers, or distributors of those cleaning products must be in compliance with the revised provisions of the SDS and labels. Now, during this transition period between the effective date and those compliance date, manufacturers have the option of complying in total with the revised final rule, or complying only with the old rule, or some combination thereof. But come those compliance dates, they must be in compliance with those most recent revisions. Next slide, please. The compliance dates on this screen are applicable largely to elements like updating the written hazard communication program and employee training that may be triggered by the labeling and SDS changes and some of the other changes that have been brought about by the most recent revisions to the OSHA standard. Now, on this slide, the most relevant date for this audience is January 19th, 2028, and that relates to mixtures. And mixtures is OSHA's terminology for what I'll call end-use products. In our world, we're talking about the cleaning products. As of that date, employers, and by that I mean manufacturers and distributors of mixtures and cleaning service providers, must be in compliance by updating their written hazard communication program, conducting any additional employee training that is necessitated by those changes implemented by OSHA in its most recent revisions to the HAZCOM standard. Let's move on to the next slide, please. So that said, let's take a brief look at some of the most recent amendments to the HAZCOM standard that came out of that May 20th final rule. First, as it relates to DOT pictograms, where a DOT pictogram appears on a label for a shipped container, like a 55-gallon drum, for example. Under these most recent revisions, the OSHA pictogram for the same hazard is now allowed. It is permissible, but not required. In addition, as it relates to label revisions, when OSHA requires a container labeling to be updated, companies know that updating no longer applies to containers that have been, in OSHA's language, released for shipment. And what they mean by that term is simply products that are packaged and labeled for shipment, but sitting in your warehouses. The labels of those do not need to be updated. Next slide. Here we have a fairly important and positive change in the classification formerly known as flammable aerosols. Specifically, OSHA has revised the flammable aerosol class by expanding it to include non-flammable aerosols and renaming this class aerosols. Anyway, non-flammable aerosols are now in category 3 of this classification. And that's an improvement because as revised, these non-flammable aerosols no longer have to have this nasty gas cylinder pictogram on their label. They can use the signal word warning instead of the word danger. And a hazard statement of, quote, contains gas under pressure, may explode if heated, is reduced to, quote, pressurized container may burst if heated, end of quote. So that provides some relief in the area of non-flammable aerosols. Briefly, in the area of trade secrets, please note that OSHA has updated Section 3 of the SDS to now allow concentration ranges to be held as a trade secret also. Next slide, please. In addition, Numerous relatively minor changes have been made to appendices A and B of the HAZCOM standard, and these relate to health and physical hazards, respectively, and both which, of course, are critical to the hazard classification process. In addition, OSHA's made multiple changes to Appendix C, which sets forth the mandatory language for the OSHA label. Likewise, with Appendix D, that sets forth the specific requirements for the SDS content. Manufacturers need to review these changes and make a determination if and what implications they may have for their respective products' labels and SDS contents. Next slide, please. All right, this next slide depicts the numerous resources OSHA has made available to help industry, you folks in the audience, comply with these latest GHS revisions to the OSHA HAZCOM standard. You will receive a copy of the PowerPoint, and it will include all these live links. I strongly recommend reviewing the side-by-side comparison, as well as the red line strikeout regulatory text and appendices. Those two documents will more readily identify the changes that you all may need to comply with. Next slide, please. And because OSHA's HAZCOM standard regulates the vast majority of cleaning products out there, we are going to feature a webinar devoted exclusively to this topic so that we can really drill down to the details related to complying with OSHA's updated HAZCOM standard. You've got the details here on the slide. Registration's open for this event. If this is a subject important for you, I highly encourage you to register for this. Next slide, please. All right, let's move on to our next topic, and that's the regulation of disinfectants, and this is the regulation of disinfectants and sanitizers intended for use on inanimate surfaces. Next slide, please. So, disinfectants and sanitizers intended for use on inanimate surfaces are regulated as pesticides pursuant to the Federal Insecticide, Fungicide, and Rodenticide Act. That's FIFRA for short, and as amended by the Pesticide Registration Improvement Act. So typically, what legally transforms a product into a disinfectant or sanitizer are the claims made in association with that product. And specifically, I'm referring to kill claims. That's K-I-L-L. Next slide, please. So that if a product claims or states or even implies that it prevents, destroys, repels, or mitigates a pest, quote unquote pest, and it is a pesticide subject to the provisions of FIFRA. Now, please realize that that term pest is further defined to include any fungus, virus, prion, or other microorganism on inanimate surfaces. So products making antimicrobial pesticide claims, making kill claims that are related to microorganisms are regulated as disinfectants, sanitizers, or pesticide devices under FIFRA. Now, examples of pesticidal claims, or I call them kill claims, would include some obvious ones like kills germs, harmful microorganisms, using the words disinfect, sanitize, or things like cleans away or removes the habitat where germs can hide, thrive, or grow. These are all claims for which EPA has pronounced they consider to be pesticidal and which will legally transform your product into a disinfectant or sanitizer which is a pesticide, which is subject to FIFRA. So next slide, please. So the implications of that are that disinfectants and sanitizers are subject to the registration and labeling provisions of FIFRA. And so EPA registration is essentially a pre-market approval process that is required of the manufacturers of those products. They must essentially demonstrate, they must prove through evidence, data, that the disinfectant, sanitizer, etc., is effective and that it presents no unreasonable harm to man or the environment. If the manufacturer successfully meets that burden and the product is registered, one of the outputs of that process will be an EPA approved label that the manufacturer can then take and register in each and every state that that product is intended to be sold. Now, the label in the context of FIFRA and disinfectants, sanitizers, and pesticides generally, the label is highly, highly regulated. Manufacturers are advised to not deviate from the direction EPA provides you in this regard. Next slide, please. So let's move the discussion on to antimicrobial pesticide devices. And so these are systems like UV lights, air purifiers, air filters, hydrochloric acid generators that may kill or antimicrobial claims, but the kill is achieved by mechanical and not chemical means. So these types of devices are regulated by EPA pursuant to FIFRA, but not quite as stringently as your traditional disinfectants or sanitizers. Allow me to summarize. So pesticide devices are not required to be registered and trusted with traditional disinfectants that are. However, it is permissible to register a pesticide device with EPA, but far and few have done that. Secondly, pesticide devices, while they're not required to be registered, are required to adhere to FIFRA labeling requirements that we displayed on the last slide. However, EPA does not review nor approve labels in this situation. Manufacturers of these devices must also register the establishment with EPA where that device is produced. Also, annual production reports must be provided to EPA, and the manufacturers must have data supporting their pesticidal or kill claims. They must have that in pocket. However, I will warn you that those data requirements are ill-defined at best. Next. All right, now for a few words about PREA, the Pesticide Registration Improvement Act. PREA was born 20 years ago, largely out of industry frustration with delays and unpredictability in the EPA registration process. Now, the premise of PREA is simple. In exchange for industry fees, EPA, the agency, agrees to provide timely and predictable registrations. However, the execution of this has really been the challenge. The latest iteration of PREA, PREA 5, was enacted in December of 22, and it provides us with new fees and timelines. Pesticide registration fees on average were increased by 30%. And this was largely needed to provide EPA with the resources it really need, largely in the form of staff. EPA was operating on probably close to half of what they needed staff-wise. In any event, an increase in financial resources, EPA can get the people it needs to process registrations timely. Review times have been lengthened in general, recognizing that pesticide registrations, and in particular antimicrobial registrations, have grown substantially more complex in recent years for a whole host of reasons. But please be aware that the new fees, the new timelines are all posted publicly online at the URL displayed on this slide. And again, you will be receiving access to these PowerPoints shortly after today's session. Also, annual maintenance fees were increased by essentially the same amount. Next slide, please. Under PREA 5, EPA must set aside up to 1/8 of available funds for staffing and resources to process what are referred to as non-PREA actions. These are registration actions that are relatively minor: change of address, change of name. There's no fee attached to it. They've received very minimal attention from EPA. Huge backlogs have been created. And while these registrations are simple in nature, not processing them delays the ability of these companies to register their products at the state level, meaning sales are shut down. So these are important. And PREA 5, we hope, provides the resources needed by EPA to address the current backlog and to improve timely processing going forward. In addition, EPA has been awarded up to $500,000 for the development of efficacy test methods for antimicrobial pesticide devices. Realized earlier, I mentioned that right now, as we sit here, those data requirements are not well defined at all, and EPA will be working to better define those in the very near future. In addition, $500,000 was awarded to EPA to train their personnel to improve efficiency, get those registrations processed as fast as possible. One of the downsides of PREA 5, bilingual labeling, will be coming to you all soon. First, this will be a reality for agricultural pesticides, but beginning in December of 2026, antimicrobial products in acute toxicity category 1 must be compliant with the bilingual labeling provisions. December 2028, that is the compliance deadline for bilingual labeling for antimicrobials in acute tox 2 category, and all other antimicrobials by December of 2030. Next slide, please. I want to share with you some of the really, truly wonderful resources EPA has compiled and has made available on their website to assist you all in registering your products with the agency and maintaining their compliance throughout that product's life cycle. A couple that I'd like to point out to you, the antimicrobial pesticide registration, wonderful resource for registering disinfectants, sanitizers, EPA's label review manual, about 180 pages related to the EPA label. So has a lot of super valuable information. For those of you who want a ready reference to the new fees and the timelines set by PREA 5, those are the last two URLs. All right, we've got one last subject for you. Next slide, please. So extended producer responsibility packaging. It's kind of a different from the other subjects that we've addressed. This is one area where our focus will be on state government activity as opposed to federal regulation, because the states are really taking the lead on this one. Next slide, please. So briefly, what is extended producer responsibility for packaging? It's essentially a reference to a body of state laws that are targeting packaging and which require the producers of the products in the packaging to join producer responsibility organizations, report packaging data, and pay fees as a condition of doing business in that state. The ultimate goal, reduce packaging waste. This is a quickly evolving area of state law and regulation. We've got 5 states with laws on the books, many more under consideration. And these laws impact, again, I want to stress it's not the producers of the packaging, it impacts the producers of the product that goes into the packaging. So this impacts manufacturers and distributors of cleaning products. Next slide, please. Let's drill down a little bit more and see how this EPR, extended producer responsibility, works. We got producers who are held responsible for the entire packaging life cycle. And we have EPR laws that now levy fees on these producers. And the purpose of those fees are really to financially support the infrastructure that's needed to manage packaging waste, collection, recycling, public outreach, and so forth. And so really what these states are doing in enacting these laws are leveraging financial incentives to encourage producers to minimize environmental impact of packaging, reduce waste, reduce single-use packaging, and promote use of more sustainable materials. Next slide, please. As I mentioned previously, producers are the ones primarily responsible under this family of EPR laws, but realize that definition of producers is broad, and it includes manufacturers of the product that goes into that packaging. It includes brand owners. Read that to mean distributors of private label products, brand licensees, importers, distributors of non-private label products, and retailers. And that, what you see there, is essentially the pecking order of responsibility under the various ERP statutes. Next slide. So today, 5 states have enacted extended producer responsibility laws. They're displayed on this slide. These laws are very early in their implementation stages. The regulatory agencies are still going through the rulemaking process, so we don't have all the details yet, but they will soon follow as the states complete their rulemaking processes, and we will be sure to share that detail with you as soon as we have it. Next slide, please. And one way we'll share that information is through a webinar that we've scheduled for October 22nd that will specifically look at extended producer responsibility, how it impacts the cleaning industry, and what you all will need to do to remain compliant and to continue to conduct business within those states. Next slide, please. So this next slide is just a reminder of all of our upcoming programs, including a live face-to-face regulatory program to be held in conjunction with the ISSA trade show on November 18th in Las Vegas. And while you are perusing our upcoming programs, let me remind you to post your questions to the chat or Q&A sections located at the bottom of your screen. And now we'll take some time to address some of those questions that have been posted by you all. Okay. There's a question that relates to the OSHA hazard communication standard. And basically asking the question, how does this apply to facilities that are using retail-facing products, which do not have GHS labeling, but standard supermarket facing? So there's a wonderful exemption within OSHA that I didn't mention earlier, but I will now, and that is if a product is subject to and is labeled consistent with the Consumer Product Safety Commission rules and regulations related to labeling, it's okay with OSHA. So, but CPSC is not an agency that has agreed to align its labeling elements with the GHS. So GHS is not a reality for consumer product safety labeling. Consumer products, the labeling of which are do not need to be compliant with GHS. That is a reality only for the I&I products which fall under OSHA's jurisdiction. Do you have, there's a question related to, do we have resources for right to know ingredient labeling on a state-by-state level? I'm not quite sure I totally understand the question, but there is only one state, California, that requires ingredients to be listed on the label. Please realize that OSHA does not require ingredients to be on the label. But California, a few years ago, issued a requirement by which now those ingredients, certain ingredients, need to be listed. And yes, we have a resource that summarizes it, and we will make that available to you. Question, will extended producer responsibility impact those entities that manufacture or distribute institutional and industrial products? Absolutely. The EPR laws typically will set forth within the body of that statute, the types of products, etc., that are subject to it. Rest assured, cleaning products, whether they be in the consumer space or I&I space, be a target of those laws. Okay. The next question relates once again to the OSHA hazard communication standard. And it asks the question, does the standard, cover residential cleaners, which are workers providing a service at someone's home? Yes, the OSHA hazard communication standard is intended to protect all workers who may be exposed to chemicals as a result of their job, whether they do that in the employer's workplace or outside the workplace, but part of the job. Those folks should be afforded the protections of the hazard communication standard. And I think that wraps up all the questions. Let me check the chat. All right. I believe we've successfully answered all the questions. So, Michelle, I think we're done.
Yes, I think we are. Well, thank you all again for attending this webinar. I know we covered a lot of different topics. If you have further questions, you can also reach out to myself or Bill, and we'll be sure to provide you that feedback. But again, thank you all for attending. It was our pleasure to discuss these topics with you today, and hope you have an enjoyable day.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.